The brutal fate of the Third Reich's tanks. On June 13, 1944, in the thick fog of Normandy, a German tank emerged from the forest and unleashed absolute chaos. In less than 20 minutes, it annihilated an entire column of British armoured vehicles. It wasn't a squadron, it was a single Tiger, commanded by Michael Wittmann. For its enemies, it was a rolling nightmare. For its crews, a prison of hot steel where every battle could be the last. And although the Reich built other lighter, faster or cheaper models, they all shared the same fate: extinction under fire and asphalt. What secrets did this seemingly unstoppable machine really hide? What was life like inside those iron giants that defined the pulse of the war? And what ultimately destroyed not only the tanks of the Third Reich, but also the myth that sustained them? Tiger I, birth of the unstoppable Predator dawn on June 13, 1944, covered the Normandy bocages with mist as a column of British armoured vehicles advanced confidently along the narrow Villers-Bocage road. At its vanguard, Sherman tanks and light vehicles of the 7th Armoured Division moved, unaware of the danger lurking in the mist. Hidden behind a dense hedge, silent as a predator, a Tiger I waited. Inside, Major Michael Wittmann observed enemy movements with calculated precision. Without warning, the 88mm cannon roared with unbridled fury. A Sherman burst into flames. Before the British could comprehend what was happening, a second shot ripped through another armoured vehicle. In just 15 minutes of one-sided combat, Wittmann destroyed 14 tanks, 15 armoured personnel carriers, and 2 anti-tank guns. Panic gripped the Allied unit as they tried to determine how many German tanks they were facing. The reality was even more terrifying. They were fighting a single steel Predator. When the Wehrmacht invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, it did so confidently, relying on the technological and tactical superiority it had demonstrated in Poland and France. Its panzer divisions cut through the Russian plain like knives through butter, tearing through Soviet mechanized formations with apparent ease. But by September, reports from the front began to change. Something disturbing was happening. Panzer III and IV shells bounced harmlessly off these new threats while Soviet guns tore through the German armor. Hitler, enraged by these reports, ordered the urgent development of a new heavy tank that would outperform anything existing on the battlefield. It was to have impenetrable armor, devastating firepower, and an instant psychological impact. The result would be the Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger Ausf E, the machine that would change the balance of armored power. The Tiger I made its combat debut not on the Russian steppes for which it had been designed, but on the sands of North Africa. In January 1943, the Afrika Korps received a handful of these new colossi to contain the Allied offensive that threatened to expel them from the continent. The first encounters revealed a terrifying reality for the Allies. The British Churchill tanks fired at the Tigers without any effect. Their shells bounced off like stones hitting a fortress. In contrast, the Tiger's 88mm cannon destroyed entire columns from over a kilometre away before the Allied armour could even spot their position. However, its African debut also revealed the giant's early weaknesses. Its engines constantly failed in the extreme heat, its tracks got stuck in the loose sand, and its enormous weight destroyed the fragile bridges and desert roads. The perfect tank on paper was beginning to show its limitations in the real world. In April 1943, during an Allied offensive near Medjez el Bab, the Tiger 131 was hit by a British 6-pounder shell. Against all odds, the armour held, but a metal splinter blocked the turret traversing mechanism. With the commander wounded and the tank unable to aim, the crew abandoned it. The Tiger 131 was captured intact, a priceless gift to Allied military intelligence. Taken to England, this example became the subject of painstaking study and remains today as the only operational Tiger I in the world preserved in the Bovington Tank Museum. The Tiger housed 5 crew members inside: commander, gunner, loader, driver, and radio operator. Although it offered more living space than other German tanks, the conditions inside that steel box were brutal and inhumane. The heat was stifling, especially in summer or during sustained combat. Temperatures could exceed 50 degrees Celsius, turning the cockpit into a metallic furnace. The deafening engine noise, external impacts, and the roar of the cannon left many crew members with permanent hearing damage. The air, polluted by combustion gases, sweat, and gunpowder, created a toxic and claustrophobic atmosphere. Limited visibility made the commander the eyes of the entire crew. Looking out of his cupola, he had to identify targets, threats, and routes while remaining exposed to enemy fire. His commands had to be precise and rapid. The gunner rotated the turret and elevated the barrel, while the loader, in a synchronized dance, loaded shells weighing up to 15 kilograms into the chamber, all in a matter of seconds. The tank officially carried 92 rounds, but experienced crews added more ammunition wherever they could, even on the ground, knowing that running out of rounds in combat was a death sentence. Each shot produced a recoil that shook the entire tank, filling the cabin with smoke and forcing the turret to be ventilated between shots. The real challenges for the Tiger came in the Eastern Theater. On the Russian steppes, winter killed more effectively than bullets. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero, freezing fuel, lubricants, and the men themselves. The Tiger's wheels accumulated snow and mud that froze overnight, completely immobilizing the vehicle. The crews slept inside the tank to survive the extreme cold, but first had to spend hours cleaning the undercarriage to avoid being stranded at dawn. The Soviets learned to exploit this vulnerability. They launched attacks at dawn, knowing that many Tigers would still be stuck in ice or warming up their engines. They developed specific tactics to deal with them, firing at their less protected flanks, targeting the radiators or the engine. Even with 14.5mm PTRD anti-tank rifles, apparently insufficient against such armor, they could damage critical components such as the running gear or optical sights. Michael Wittmann became the public face of the Tiger, with over 138 tanks destroyed, but he was not the only one to achieve legendary status. SS Unterscharführer Franz Staudigger, during the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, single-handedly halted a Soviet offensive by destroying 22 T-34 tanks in a single day, a feat that earned him the Knight's Cross. Otto Carius, another name inscribed in the legend of the armored vehicle, commanded a Tiger I in the forests of Latvia. With over 150 enemy vehicles destroyed throughout his career, Carius argued that the Tiger's true strength lay not only in its armor or its gun, but in precision, ambush, and the coordinated work of well-trained crews. His memoirs, Tigers in the Mud, offer a stark look at life inside these steel giants. These men, elevated to the status of heroes by Reich propaganda, represented the idealized image of German armored personnel carriers, deadly precision and technical superiority in the face of the Soviet human avalanche. But even they would eventually face the inevitable reality of a war that could no longer be won with individual tanks, no matter how lethal. By 1944, the balance that had kept the Tiger as the sovereign of the battlefield began to unravel. The Allies developed the Sherman Firefly, equipped with a 17-pounder cannon capable of piercing the Tiger's frontal armor at close range. The Soviets responded with the IS-2, armed with a devastating 122mm cannon. The American M10 Wolverine and M36 Jackson tank destroyers also appeared on the scene, capable of taking on the German giant. But beyond enemy power, it was numbers that ultimately crushed the Tiger. Germany produced a mere 1,347 Tiger Is throughout the entire war. The Allies, in return, produced tens of thousands of T-34s, Shermans, and Churchills. In many engagements, the ratio was 1 Tiger to 30 enemy tanks. On the 8th of August 1944, Michael Wittmann met his end near the village of Sainthau, Normandy. His Tiger 007 was hit by enemy fire and exploded, instantly killing all crew. For decades, there was debate about who delivered the final blow. A Canadian Firefly of the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry, a British Typhoon carrying rockets or artillery fire. But the identity of the executioner is irrelevant. What is significant is that Wittmann's death symbolically marked the end of the myth of the invincible Tiger. Panzer IV, the colossus that held the Reich. The first light of September 1st, 1939, lit up the Polish sky as columns of German tanks crossed the border, launching the Second World War. Among them were rectangular profile vehicles with short 75mm cannons, the Panzer IV Ausf. B. Their initial mission was not to engage other tanks, but to destroy fortifications, support the infantry, and pave the way for the rest of the Blitzkrieg. Unlike the more agile Panzer III, designed specifically for combat against other armored vehicles, the Panzer IV was conceived as a support tank. But fate would have a much more crucial role in store for it. making it the backbone of German armored personnel carriers throughout the war. The Panzer IV was conceived in 1934 under the euphemism medium tractors, a necessary subterfuge to evade the restrictions of the Versailles Treaty, which prohibited Germany from developing offensive weapons. Its design responded to the need for a heavy support vehicle to accompany the Panzer III in armored formations. While the Panzer III carried a 37mm cannon designed to pierce enemy armor, the IV was armed with a low-velocity 75mm cannon, ideal against bunkers, entrenched infantry and fortifications, but ineffective against the modern armor that would appear later. The first versions, OSF A, B, C, and D, featured 15 to 30mm of frontal armor, sufficient against light anti-tank weapons but vulnerable to any high-velocity cannon. Its leaf-spring suspension and relatively wide tracks gave it acceptable mobility over varied terrain. However, the Panzer IV's true value lay in its modular design and adaptability, qualities that would prove crucial as the war progressed. During the French campaign, 1940, the Panzer IVs were deployed in limited numbers. Only 278 units were available from the more than 2,500 tanks that made up the panzer divisions. The most intense combats were against French armored vehicles such as the Char B-1 and the Saumur S-35, which were technologically superior in armor and in some cases armament. These engagements first demonstrated the disadvantage of the Panzer IV's low-velocity armament. While its 75mm gun was effective for infantry support, it could not penetrate the frontal armor of many enemy tanks. The temporary solution was to use combined tactics with the Panzer III and the Luftwaffe, as well as flanking maneuvers to attack the weakest areas of the French armor. Despite these limitations, the swift victory in France temporarily masked the design's shortcomings. However, German engineers were already clear that the Panzer IV would need a radical overhaul if it was to remain relevant on future battlefields. The real turning point came with the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. In the fields of Ukraine and the vast Russian steppes, the Panzer IVs encountered adversaries that exceeded all previous expectations, the Soviet T-34 and K-1. These revolutionary new tanks combined sloped armor, high-velocity guns, and exceptional mobility in difficult terrain. Compared to them, the Panzer III and IV were completely obsolete. Their shells bounced harmlessly off Soviet armor, while they themselves were vulnerable even to long-range fire. Desperate reports reaching the German High Command from the front prompted a drastic decision to completely reconfigure the role of the Panzer IV. In 1942, the AUSF AF-2 model was introduced, equipped with the new high-velocity KWK 40L43 gun, capable of penetrating T-34 armor at over 1,000 meters. This fundamental transformation transformed the Panzer IV from a support tank into the new main battle tank of the German army, a role it would maintain until the end of the war. Panzer IV series, models G, H, and J, represents the evolutionary culmination of the design. The AUSF G, 1942-43, improved the frontal armor up to 80mm by means of additional plates, incorporated improved visors, and added the characteristic side skirts, Schürzen, which provided additional protection against anti-tank rifles and shaped charges of early bazookas. The AUSF EH, 1943-44, increased the weight to almost 25 tons, replacing part of the riveted armor with welded plates that offered greater ballistic protection. The gun was finally stabilized in the L-48 version, ideal for medium-range combat. The AUSF-J, 1944-45, reflected the desperation of the final months of the war. Design simplification due to shortage of resources, elimination of the electric turret traverse system, now manually operated, and reduction of non-essential components to speed up production. With these successive modifications, the Panzer IV became the most produced tank of the Third Reich, with more than 8,500 units manufactured in all its variants. While the Eastern Front was bleeding dry, the Panzer IVs were also sent to North Africa, where they would face the British in the unforgiving Libyan and Tunisian desert. There, the climate became their worst enemy. The extreme heat warped the barrels, sand penetrated every mechanism, blocked the air filters, and jammed the turrets. Temperatures inside the tank frequently exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. The metal surfaces burned to the touch, and the crews spent hours stifling in close quarters, surrounded by ammunition, equipment, and the sweat of 5 men. Disease, dehydration, and exhaustion caused as many casualties as enemy fire. However, during critical battles such as Gazala and the Kasserine Pass, the Panzer IVs demonstrated tactical superiority over the M3 Lee and early American Shermans. The long 75mm gun was deadly at range, allowing German formations to dictate the terms of the battle. One British commander once said, "The moment we see it on the horizon, we know we're going to lose tanks." In the east, the Panzer IV bore the brunt of the German armoured effort. Unlike the Tiger or Panther, its relatively simple mechanics allowed for emergency repairs in the field. Many units managed to remain operational for weeks with cannibalized parts and improvised modifications. During the fierce battles of Kharkov, Kursk, and Narva, Panzer IVs formed the backbone of defensive formations against the unstoppable Soviet onslaught. At Kursk, July 1943, they faced tens of thousands of Soviet tanks in the largest armored engagement in history, a clash of titans where every inch of ground was covered in corpses and smoking metal carcasses. In June 1944, when the Allies landed on the beaches of Normandy, the Panzer IV was still the most common armored vehicle in the Western Panzer divisions. Its new main adversary, the M4 Sherman, both in its standard version and the fearsome Firefly variant with a 17-pounder gun. At close range, British Fireflies could easily destroy any Panzer IV. But in open country, the German 75mm gun remained deadly effective. During the desperate defense of Caen and the Falaise pocket, well-camouflaged Panzer IVs ambushed Allied columns, causing heavy losses. However, the Allies' overwhelming air superiority radically changed the rules of armoured combat. Ground attack aircraft, especially British Typhoons armed with RP-3 rockets, became the bane of German armoured formations. The Panzer IVs, with their distinctive profile and limited mobility in the Normandy bocage, were perfect targets from the air. Under these extreme conditions, the average lifespan of a Panzer IV crew in active combat was reduced to just 2 weeks before being killed, wounded, or captured. 5 men shared a space roughly the size of a telephone booth, developing a forced intimacy that forged unbreakable bonds. The driver, located on the front left, controlled a 25-ton vehicle using steering levers that required simultaneous brute force and precision. To his right, the radio operator/machine gunner maintained communications and manned the MG-34 front machine gun. In the turret, the gunner, on the left, operated the main gun, aiming through optical sights that severely limited his field of view. The loader, on the right, handled shells weighing several kilograms in a confined space, performing a synchronized dance with the gunner to maintain the rate of fire. The commander, located in the center with access to the cupola, acted as the eyes of the tank and directed the entire operation. His ability to detect threats, identify targets, and coordinate with other units often determined the vehicle's survivability. Every hit could mean instant death. Fear was constant, but so was the unbreakable bond between comrades. Crews developed elaborate superstitions, pre-combat rituals, and their own language. Each crew functioned as a family under constant fire, where individual survival depended absolutely on collective cohesion. By 1945, with Germany collapsing on all fronts, the Panzer IVs could no longer compete technologically with the Soviet IS-2s, the American M26 Pershings, or even the improved Sherman Fireflies. Short on fuel and spare parts, many units used their tanks as mobile bunkers, entrenched among the rubble in static defensive positions. The AOSF J version, the last produced, was a stark reflection of the Reich's desperation. No electric turret traversing system, fuel tanks housed inside the fighting compartment, increasing the risk of catastrophic fires, and all metal wheels due to a shortage of rubber. The mechanical failure rate soared, but it no longer mattered. Many tanks were abandoned after minor breakdowns that, in previous years, would have been repaired in a matter of hours. Fuel shortages became the final judgment for many Panzer IVs. Units had to establish brutal priorities: which tanks to save, which to abandon, who to condemn. When a tank was immobile, it was usually destroyed by its own crew using improvised explosives, fire, or even firing the main gun with the breech open to destroy the mechanism. With over 8,500 units produced, the Panzer IV was the most widely used tank of the Third Reich and the only one in constant production from 1936 to 1945. Its versatile chassis served as a platform for multiple derivative vehicles such as the Stuggi IV, the Jagged Panzer IV, and various self-propelled guns that extended its legacy into multiple roles. Unlike the Tiger or Panther, whose impact was more symbolic than material, the Panzer IV fulfilled its duty until the very last day of the war. It was less glamorous, less feared by Allied propaganda, but infinitely more reliable and present on all fronts. It was, in the most literal sense, the true workhorse that sustained the German war effort. Panther, the deadly dream that was born. Flawed panzer divisions advance relentlessly across the expanses of Ukraine and Belarus. Operation Barbarossa seems to be meeting all the High Command's expectations until something radically changes in October. The German Fourth Army, near Mtsensk, receives information about a new type of Soviet tank never seen before. Their reports describe a low-profile armored vehicle with 60-degree sloped armor that ricochets shells and surprising mobility even in difficult terrain. It's the T-34, and in a matter of weeks, this revolutionary tank completely transforms German perceptions of armored warfare. The Panzer III and IV are suddenly revealed to be obsolete in the face of this threat. Their guns fail to penetrate Soviet armor, and their vertical plate designs are exposed as fatally antiquated. Adolf Hitler, deeply alarmed by these reports, ordered the urgent development of a new tank that would overcome all Soviet threats. This vehicle was to combine mobility, armor, and firepower in a single platform. Thus was born the concept of the Panther, officially designated Panzerkampfwagen V. The development of the Panther is proceeding at an unprecedented pace. Instead of relying on previous models, German engineers are creating an entirely new platform with ambitious specifications. A 45-ton tank with sloped armor of up to 80 millimeters on the front, a relatively low silhouette, and a gun capable of outperforming even the Tiger's legendary 88mm. The selected weapon was the 75mm KWK 42L/70, a very high-speed weapon, over 935 meters per second, that, with armor-piercing rounds, could penetrate 150 millimeters of armor at a distance of 1,000 meters. Ballistically, this gun was superior to the Tiger's 88mm in armor penetration, albeit with a lighter round. The suspension uses a torsion bar system with interlocking wheels, providing an exceptionally smooth ride in open country, ideal for precise shooting on the move. The mechanical heart, a 700-horsepower Maybach HL 230P30, the same engine used in the Tiger I, but powering a vehicle 12 tons lighter. July 1943. In the Kursk region, the German army is preparing the largest concentration of armored forces of the entire war for a decisive offensive against heavily entrenched Soviet positions. For Hitler, this operation, Citadel, represents the perfect opportunity to test his new secret weapon in combat, the Panther. A total of 200 Panthers Ausf D tanks are deployed to the southern sector, assigned to the 48th Panzer Corps. Expectations are high, but the debut turns out to be catastrophic. Only 16 Panthers are operational on the first day of battle. Many break down during rail transport to the front. Some spontaneously combust without firing a single shell. Failures in the transmission, cooling system, and lubrication turn the supposed savior of armored warfare into an embarrassing spectacle. Despite these problems, the few Panthers that manage to see combat demonstrate formidable destructive capacity. In head-on duels, they annihilate T-34s with astonishing ease, confirming the lethality of their cannon. But the damage is already done. Their reputation for invulnerability is compromised by internal failures, not by enemy action. By the end of the operation, more than 200 Panthers were out of action, approximately 130 due solely to mechanical failures. The dream of German technological superiority faded into a reality of smoke, fire, and still steel. Following the Kursk debacle, the High Command recognized that the Panther needed urgent improvements before it could fulfill its strategic role. The AUF-A and AUSF-G models were introduced, featuring redesigned turrets, more reliable armor, an improved commander's cupola, and substantial modifications to the exhaust and ventilation system to reduce spontaneous fires. The G version, introduced in 1944, became the most widely produced and reliable of the series. The frontal machine gun was removed to reinforce the armor, and the side skirts were improved for better protection against shaped charge shells. However, many mechanical flaws persisted, especially in the final drive and the undercarriage axles, which were simply not designed to support such weight. The Panther arrived on the Western Front in significant numbers after the Allied landings in Normandy. In this new scenario, it demonstrated its devastating capabilities against the Shermans, systematically destroying them at distances where American tanks could not even respond effectively. From camouflaged positions, Panthers with experienced crews wreak havoc on Allied armored units. Their relatively low silhouette, superior Zeiss optics, and devastating L/70 cannon make them a fearsome predator in open country. The optimal engagement distance between 1,500 and 2,000 meters is well beyond the effective range of most Allied weapons. However, the Normandy terrain is far from ideal for the Panther. The bocage, a maze of high hedges, stone walls, and narrow paths, negates many of its advantages. In this environment, the Panther's long gun severely limits its maneuverability in confined spaces. Rotating the turret in narrow alleyways consumes vital time, and its 40 to 45 millimeters of side armor makes it vulnerable to bazooka attacks, Pi-80s, and Sherman Firefly ambushes that exploit its weak point. Typhoon and Thunderbolt fighter bombers, armed with armor-piercing missiles, destroyed dozens of Panthers from the air. For many crews, the real enemy wasn't the Sherman, but the clear sky that exposed their positions. December 1944. In a desperate attempt to change the course of the war, Hitler launches Operation Wacht am Rhein, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. Approximately 400 Panthers are deployed in this final offensive. Among them, a special group participates in Operation Greif, where 5 Panthers are disguised as American M10 tank destroyers, with the aim of infiltrating behind Allied lines and sowing chaos. The plan fails miserably. The visual differences between the two vehicles are too obvious for any trained observer. The German accents of their crews betray them at roadblocks, and all are destroyed without achieving any significant objective. Panthers fighting conventionally inflicted heavy initial losses on Allied armor, especially during the first days of the offensive. But the same old problems reappeared. Lack of fuel, poor logistics, and absolute Allied air superiority doomed the German advance. In many cases, perfectly functional Panthers were immobilized due to lack of fuel, and their crews were ordered to destroy them to prevent capture. In 1944, the Eastern Front was inexorably crumbling. The Panzer divisions, already decimated by years of continuous combat, desperately tried to stem the Soviet advance in East Prussia, Hungary, and Silesia. The Panther became the centerpiece of Germany's mobile defenses, the last hope of stemming the Red Tide advancing toward Berlin. With adequate infantry support, Panthers ambush columns of T-34s and IS-2s from camouflaged positions in forests or ruined villages. Major Ernst Bachmann of the 2nd SS Panzer Division. Das Reich becomes famous for his action at Bachmann's Corner, where his lone Panther destroys an entire column of Allied armor. Although completely surrounded, Bachmann manages to withdraw after inflicting disproportionate damage on the enemy. However, the overall picture is absolutely bleak. For every operational Panther, there are 5 waiting for spare parts that will never arrive. Novice crews receive hasty and insufficient training. Fuel is running low to critical levels. The Luftwaffe has virtually disappeared from the skies, leaving tanks exposed to enemy aircraft. The war is lost, and the Panther is a helpless witness to the final collapse. Tiger II, the steel monster that led to the abyss, January 1943. Hitler gathers his top tank designers at his headquarters. Despite the Tiger I's impressive reputation on the battlefield, the Führer demands something even more formidable. He has read disturbing reports from the Eastern Front. The Soviets are developing a new generation of heavy armored vehicles, and if the Reich is to survive, it must create a mechanical monster capable of dominating any battlefield through sheer brute force. Thus was born the concept of the Panzerkampfwagen 6 Ausf. B, better known as the Tiger II or Königstiger, Royal Tiger. A 70-ton colossus, protected by 180 millimeters of sloped frontal armor to maximize its effectiveness, armed with the longest and most accurate version of the 88mm cannon ever mounted on a combat vehicle. Hitler wanted the ultimate tank, the perfect weapon. He got it, but at an unsustainable price. The first Tiger II models used a Porsche-designed turret with rounded shapes and geometrically complex armor. Although aesthetically impressive, it presented serious vulnerability problems on its sides, where the armor was insufficient. Henschel soon introduced a more angled and better protected alternative version, which became the production standard. The vehicle's hull is directly inspired by the Panther, with steeply sloped frontal armor that maximizes effective protection. But unlike its medium cousin, the Tiger II is a behemoth that completely sacrifices tactical mobility in favor of protection and firepower. The Maybach HL-230 engine that powers the Panther and Tiger I is not sized to pull a 70-ton Hulk. From its conception, there was a fatal imbalance between weight and available power. Where the Tiger II truly excels is in its destructive capacity. Its 88mm KWK-43L/71 cannon represents the pinnacle of German anti-tank artillery. It can penetrate 200 millimeters of armor at over 2 kilometers, turning any Allied tank into a vulnerable target, regardless of the engagement distance. In controlled firing exercises, its gunners achieved precise hits against moving targets at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters, something simply unimaginable for any other tank of the time. In theory, no Allied armored vehicle could face it head-on with any hope of survival. The Sherman and T-34 were destroyed with a single direct hit. Only specialized heavy weapons such as the Sherman Firefly's 17-pounder gun, the M36 Jackson's 90mm cannon, or the massive 122mm of the Soviet IS-2 could hope to damage it, provided they managed to attack its less well-protected flanks. The fundamental problem is that the Tiger II has serious difficulties maneuvering nimbly, retreating quickly, or repositioning after firing. When the terrain presents steep slopes or swampy areas, the giant frequently gets stuck. Its opponents, being swifter and more agile, learn to hunt it like a pack of wolves surrounding a wounded bear, flanking it, distracting it, and hitting its vulnerable points. July 1944. France is burning under the Allied invasion. The Normandy landings have opened a second front in Western Europe, and the Panzer divisions desperately try to stem the Anglo-American tide. The 503rd Heavy Tank Battalion receives its first Tiger IIs and deploys them near Caen. The psychological impact is immediate and profound. In the first engagements, Tiger II's destroyed dozens of Allied tanks from distances exceeding 1,500 meters, completely beyond the enemy's effective response range. The British crews initially mistook them for Tiger IIs until they noticed their longer barrel and distinctive turret profile. In August 1944, the Tiger IIs of the 501st Battalion faced the Soviets for the first time during the Lvov-Sandomierz offensive. In open terrain, the results were devastating. The powerful 122mm guns of the Soviet IS-2 failed to penetrate the Tiger II's frontal armor at ranges of less than 1,000 meters, while the German tank could destroy any enemy armored vehicle almost at will. During one particularly intense day, a single Tiger II platoon destroys 14 T-34s without receiving critical hits. Technological superiority seems unquestionable, but for every tank that successfully advances, another is immobilized by a destroyed transmission or collapsed undercarriage. The suspension system, originally designed for 45-ton vehicles, simply cannot withstand the continuous stress. The logistics chain, constantly bombarded from the air, cannot maintain the flow of fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. By the time Sandomierz falls to the advancing Soviets, more than 40% of the Tiger IIs have been destroyed by their own crews or simply abandoned after irreparable failures in the field. April 1945. Berlin is surrounded by the Red Army. Amid the smoking rubble and improvised barricades, the last operational Tiger IIs resist the Soviet advance toward the heart of the Reich. They are used as mobile fortresses, strategically positioned on key avenues and critical junctions. A single Tiger II can temporarily halt an entire column of Soviet IS-2 tanks, buying precious hours for the desperate defense. Tiergarten district, Eyewitnesses report that a single Tiger II destroyed 12 Soviet tanks before being outflanked and eliminated. Another was captured virtually intact after being abandoned without fuel by its crew, a valuable trophy that will end up in the Kubinka Tank Museum in Russia. Stuggi III, the silent hunter that changed the war winter, 1935. At artillery headquarters in Berlin, the strategists of the newly reformed Wehrmacht faced a fundamental tactical problem. The German infantry, the centerpiece of the future Blitzkrieg, urgently needed direct and effective armored support. Conventional tanks, operating independently, were insufficient to guarantee the continuous advance of the infantry. The emerging concept of Blitzkrieg required specialized vehicles capable of eliminating obstacles, machine gun nests, and fortified positions with surgical precision. General Erich von Manstein proposed a revolutionary idea, an armored assault gun without a rotating turret that added weight and complexity, built on a proven chassis. The proposal was approved in 1936 as a military priority. Thus, the Sturmgeschütz III, abbreviated as Stuggi III, was born, using the proven Panzer III chassis as a base. The first models, the Ausf. A, began production in 1940 and saw action during the French campaign. Its success was immediate and overwhelming. Its exceptionally low profile made it difficult to detect and even harder to hit, while its mobility allowed it to keep up with the rapid pace of the German motorized divisions. But in this initial phase, the Stuggi III remains essentially an infantry support weapon. A radical transformation is on the horizon that would completely redefine its role on the battlefield. June 1941. Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of the Soviet Union, begins. Stuggi III's accompany infantry in assaults on towns, strategic hills, and trench systems, providing concentrated firepower where it is most needed. But an unexpected event drastically alters their trajectory. An encounter with the revolutionary Soviet T-34 and KV-1 tanks. Conventional German anti-tank weapons proved completely ineffective against these new-generation armored vehicles. Even the short-barreled Panzer IVs struggled to cause significant damage. But the Stuggi III, with its stable chassis and low profile, proves to be an ideal platform for the powerful new armament. In 1942, the vehicle was fitted with the high-velocity 75mm Stuggi 40L/43 cannon, capable of penetrating the armor of any Soviet tank at medium ranges. This fundamental transformation transformed the Stuggi III from a simple infantry support vehicle into a lethal tank destroyer that silently lurked among ruins and vegetation, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash its deadly power. The AUSF F version quickly becomes a nightmare for Soviet tankers, who never know where the next Stuggi might be hiding. With the introduction of the L-48 gun in the AUSF G version, the Stuggi III completed its metamorphosis. By 1943, it was as lethal as any Panzer IV, but cost a third less, required fewer strategic materials, and could be produced more quickly. Its extremely low silhouette, barely 2.2 meters tall compared to almost 3 meters for a conventional tank, transformed it into the undisputed master of the ambush. From concealed positions in forests, trenches, or semi-ruined buildings, Stuggi III's opened fire on unsuspecting columns of T-34s, M4 Shermans, and KV-85s. Many Allied tankers don't even detect the hunter's presence until it's too late, and the first shell has already hit their vehicle. In defensive operations, the Stuggi III represents the perfect vehicle. Simple yet effective, economical yet deadly, easy to conceal but devastating when revealed. As Germany loses the strategic initiative and is forced into an increasingly defensive posture, the value of the Stuggi III increases exponentially. From 1943 onwards, the German High Command, aware that it could not win a war of attrition with complex and expensive vehicles like the Tiger and the Panther, decisively opted for the Stuggi III. More than 10,000 units were built between 1940 and 1945, making it the most produced armored vehicle of the Third Reich, even surpassing the Panzer IV. The Stuggi III demonstrates its versatility by fighting in every imaginable war zone, from the Finnish Arctic Circle to the urban ruins of Stalingrad, from the arid expanses of the North African desert to the narrow alleys of Warsaw and Budapest. In Italy, Stugs defend strategic points amid ancient ruins converted into makeshift fortresses. In Normandy, they ambush British tank columns, taking advantage of the dense vegetation of the bocage. In Hungary, Stug-centric tactical groups temporarily halt numerically superior Soviet offensives. And in the streets of besieged Berlin, they become one of the last vehicles to resist the advancing Red Army, firing from basements and collapsed buildings. Experienced crews develop an aphorism that perfectly sums up their combat philosophy. One well-camouflaged Stuggi III is worth 3 enemy tanks, because they will never know what hit them or from where. As 1944 progressed, the Stuggi III's situation reflected the broader reality of the German army, increasingly outnumbered and technologically outclassed. Allied aerial artillery, high-velocity anti-tank guns, and chronic shortages of fuel and spare parts progressively undermined its operational effectiveness. In many cases during the final months of the war, Stugs were abandoned without firing due to lack of fuel or basic maintenance. The German logistics chain, systematically destroyed by strategic bombing, simply could no longer sustain large-scale mechanized operations. Even so, the Stug III maintained its reputation for effectiveness until the final days of the conflict. In the ruins of Berlin, there are documented reports of a Stuggi III destroying 5 Soviet IS-2 heavy tanks before being finally neutralized. Another was adapted as a mobile command post for SS units defending the last defensive perimeters around the Reichstag. The last operational examples are generally destroyed by their own crews, who prefer to blow them up with explosive charges rather than allow their capture by Soviet or American forces. Surprisingly, the story of the Stuggi III does not end with the German surrender in May 1945. Numerous captured units remained in active service for decades in multiple armies. Finland kept its Stuggis operational well into the 1960s, modernizing them with updated engines and communication systems. Syria used recovered examples during the fighting on the Golan Heights in 1967. Spain experimented with captured units to evaluate armored design concepts. Its mechanical robustness, ease of maintenance, and combat effectiveness allow the Stuggi III to survive long after the collapse of the regime that created it, an eloquent testament to the fundamental soundness of its design. Jagged Panther and Jagged Tiger, the ghosts of the deadly ambush. As the war progressed and Germany painfully transitioned from strategic offensive to desperate defensive, military planners identified an increasingly urgent tactical need to destroy numerically superior enemy tanks without engaging in protracted combat, where the numerical disadvantage would prove fatal. It was no longer enough to maneuver or flank, as in the glory days of the Blitzkrieg. Now, overwhelming firepower was required from well-prepared defensive positions. The ability to neutralize enemy armor at distances that impeded effective response. Thus was born the refined concept of the tank destroyer, Jagdpanzer, armored vehicles without a rotating turret, armed with extraordinarily powerful guns specifically designed to ambush, fire, and reposition undetected. If the conventional tank was a wolf hunting in a coordinated pack, the tank destroyer represented an armored sniper, patient, lethal, and practically invisible until the precise moment of unleashing its devastating power. From this defensive doctrine emerged 2 of the most fearsome war machines ever deployed on a battlefield, the Jagged Panther and the Jagged Tiger. The Jagged Panther SDKFZ 173 is developed on the proven Panther chassis Ausf G, taking advantage of its excellent combination of mobility and protection. From the first conceptual sketches, it's clear that this vehicle represents something fundamentally different in the German arsenal. Its main armament is the Third Reich's most effective anti-tank gun, the 88mm PK 43L/71, identical to the one mounted on the Tiger II. This impressive cannon can destroy any known Allied armored vehicle from distances exceeding 2,500 meters, transforming the Jagged Panther into a long-range predator. Unlike the conventional Panther, the Jagged Panther completely dispenses with the rotating turret. This fundamental modification offers 3 critical advantages: a significantly lower silhouette that makes it difficult to detect, thicker and more evenly distributed frontal armor, and less complex mechanics that reduce costs and facilitate production. The frontal section reaches 100 millimeters of steel inclined at 55 degrees, creating protection virtually impenetrable to most Allied weapons of the time. Production began in January 1944, and in just a year and a half, approximately 415 units were built. Although this figure seems modest compared to other armored vehicles, these tank destroyers represented an unprecedented concentration of destructive power. Jagged Panther's greatest tactical advantage lies not only in its technical specifications, but in its operational performance. In real combat, the vehicle is virtually invisible until the exact moment it decides to reveal itself through fire. Allied intelligence reports during the Normandy campaign describe with awe and fear devastating ambushes where entire columns of Shermans are systematically annihilated without their crews being able to identify the source of the enemy fire. While the Jagged Panther perfects the balance between firepower and tactical mobility, the Jagged Tiger, SDKFZ 186 represents the maximalist approach to the tank destroyer concept. Built on the massive Tiger II chassis, the Jagged Tiger is, quite simply, the heaviest armored fighting vehicle ever deployed operationally during World War II. The Jagged Panther first saw combat in Normandy during the summer of 1944. In the Caen sector, carefully camouflaged units in wooded areas destroyed dozens of Allied tanks before they could even respond effectively. During the Battle of the Bulge, Jagged Panthers led devastatingly effective ambushes, especially in the early phases of the offensive. Even the improved M36 Jackson and Sherman Firefly, specifically designed to counter German heavy armor, found the Jagged Panther extremely difficult to engage in real-world combat. One of the most famous episodes occurred near St. Vith in December 1944, where just 3 well-positioned Jagged Panthers destroyed 14 Allied tanks in approximately 20 minutes, without suffering any significant hits. When they were finally located and forced to withdraw, they did so in perfect tactical order, suffering no casualties. The Jagged Tiger, on the other hand, began its operational deployment much later. Its baptism of fire came in January 1945, with the 512th Heavy Tank Destroyer Battalion on the Western Front. Its most distinguished commander, the famous Otto Carius, formerly a Tiger I ace, managed to destroy more than 20 enemy armored vehicles with his Jagged Tiger in just a few weeks of combat. Significantly, his unit lost the vehicle not to direct enemy action, but to catastrophic mechanical failure during a hasty retreat. T-34, the tank that brought down the Nazi Empire. By the mid-1930s, the Soviet military industry was technologically lagging behind its potential rivals. Although it possessed thousands of light tanks such as the T-26 and the fast BT, these vehicles demonstrated serious deficiencies in real combat: insufficient armor, inadequate armament, and questionable mechanical reliability. The experiences gained in the Spanish Civil War, and especially in the Battle of Khalkhin Gol against Japan in 1939, made it painfully clear that the Red Army urgently needed a new armored concept. In 1937, engineer Mikhail Koshkin, working at the Kharkiv industrial plant, took on the daring challenge of developing a radically new design that would forever transform armored warfare. The initial result was the A-32 prototype, which would quickly evolve into an experimental model designated the A-34, armed with a 76.2mm gun and protected by sloped armor that defied all conventional standards of the time. This revolutionary vehicle was officially named T-34 in reference to the year originally planned for its adoption, 1934, although its serial production would not begin until 1940, after exhaustive tests and modifications. What made the T-34 an extraordinary creation was not a single element, but the synergistic combination of multiple conceptual innovations. Unlike contemporary German tanks, which used highly flammable gasoline engines, the T-34 featured a robust 500-horsepower V2 diesel engine. This engine not only offered greater range but was significantly less likely to catch fire when hit by enemy fire, increasing the crew's chances of survival. On June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. Millions of German soldiers crossed the Soviet border, accompanied by thousands of Panzer III and IV tanks that had previously demonstrated their superiority in Poland, France, and the Balkans. During the first few weeks, the German advance seemed absolutely unstoppable. But soon, across the vast fields of Ukraine and the plains of Belarus, an unexpected element emerged that would fundamentally alter the course of the conflict. German tank commanders face the T-34 for the first time and are shocked. Desperate reports reach the high command in Berlin. Standard 37mm Panzer III and towed anti-tank shells fail to penetrate the sloped Soviet armor even at close range. Even the more powerful Panzer IVs, with their short 75mm gun, have severe difficulty neutralizing the threat. Meanwhile, the T-34s advance with impunity, moving with surprising speed and striking with devastating accuracy, surviving hits that would have completely destroyed any German panzer. General Heinz Guderian, the father of panzer doctrine, urgently demands that an intact T-34 be captured in order to analyze its design in detail. General von Kleist, commander of the 1st Panzer Group, unequivocally described it as the best tank in the world after facing it in combat. Adolf Hitler himself received alarming reports that Soviet armor was technically superior to anything in the German arsenal. The Wehrmacht suddenly realized that it was facing an armored revolution, a tank that redefined all previously accepted rules regarding the design and tactical use of armored vehicles. Beginning in 1942, Stalin made a crucial strategic decision that would alter the material balance of the war, to centralize and massively accelerate production of the T-34, prioritizing it over virtually any other military program. Between 1941 and 1945, more than 57,000 T-34s with a 76mm gun original model were manufactured, and another 22,000 of the improved T-34/85 model, making it not only the most produced tank of the entire Second World War, but also the most numerous armored combat vehicle in history up to that time. By late 1943, the Soviets faced a new challenge on the battlefield: the appearance of the fearsome German Tiger I and Panther, technologically advanced armored vehicles specifically designed to counter the original T-34. The T-34's standard 76.2mm gun could no longer effectively penetrate the frontal armor of these new adversaries, creating a worrying tactical disadvantage. The Soviet response perfectly exemplifies their pragmatic approach. Rather than designing a completely new tank, a process that would take years, they substantially modified the existing T-34, creating the T-34/85. This model incorporated a powerful 85mm Zeiss S-53 gun adapted for anti-aircraft systems, a new, wider and more spacious turret with room for 3 crew members instead of 2, and various improvements to its armor and internal systems. In July 1943, the T-34 experienced its decisive moment in the gigantic Battle of Kursk, unanimously considered the largest armored engagement in military history. The Germans launched Operation Citadel with their best panzer units, equipped with hundreds of Tiger and Panther tanks recently arrived at the front. But the Soviets had meticulously prepared their defense: thousands of kilometers of interconnected trenches, minefields of unprecedented depth, massive concentrations of anti-tank artillery, and crucially, an immense strategic reserve of T-34s organized in increasingly sophisticated tactical formations. The ensuing Soviet counterattack, spearheaded by massive formations of T-34s coordinated by radio and supported by tactical aircraft, unequivocally marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich's expansionist ambitions. During 1944 and 1945, T-34s/85s led the unstoppable Soviet offensive toward Berlin. They successively crossed the Dnieper, Vistula, and Oder rivers. They participated in the liberation of Warsaw, the conquest of Budapest and Vienna, and finally in April 1945 penetrated the eastern suburbs of the German capital.